Hello, welcome to the Story Studio podcast for real this time. We heard from a few unfortunate souls at our last recording of our podcast that apparently they thought that the Story Studio podcast was starting at 3.
We should do that all the time. Just trick people to go to worst show ever.
When in fact it was worst show ever.
Why would you want anybody to ever hear that ever for any reason?
So this is indeed the actual Story Studio podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a project called Steal This, which actually is the person who said that they thought there was going to be Story Studios because it was an email that I wrote from yesterday about this episode. So yes, we did mention this in the email, but it's supposed to be 3:45. But anyway, it's a project that we're doing it's called Steal This. Sean is going to describe it. Sean is going to describe it in just a second. And we have on Joel and Bonnie, who podcast listeners have met before, if you've been listening, and they're doing a couple projects in this as well. And so I think, Sean, I'm just going to pass it over to you to describe what.
Yeah,
it is NaNoWriMo Day, appropriate.
Right. Yeah, it is Nano Day, which is kind of what this project is centered around. So that's all cool. Do we want to do something cool before we jump into this?
Anyone I don't actually have one, and there are 5 of us, so bursting with one. Then we could
Dave, do you have something cool?
Dave's bursting with something.
I watched that movie Eli on Netflix, and the first 2/3 of it were cool, and then the end was laughable.
What's Eli? The Book of Eli, the old movie with Denzel?
No, it's about a kid that he has he's allergic to everything, and they bring him to this house to kind of cure him. Or not a facility that's run by these women, but something sinister is going on, and the whole thing, it's well acted. I'm liking where it's going, and then at the end they just fuck it all up.
Is it
like
made
the
for
Devil's
Netflix?
Advocate?
It is a Netflix movie. I don't know how it started off.
All right.
I could say more, but I would spoil it.
Have you seen? I know we can't talk about this now because it's actually the show we're doing next. But have you started watching Living with Yourself yet?
I had no interest in that at all.
Really? Why?
And now it looks awful.
Oh my God.
No, it's not.
No,
I'm enjoying it.
Yes, but it's Dave. Dave.
That's true.
It's going to be something weird, like his hatred for Aziz Ansari. It has nothing to do with anything.
Or like the way that he bailed on Story Shop when back when we were still involved with Story Shop because of the blue.
Because it was turquoise, right? Yeah.
Oh, that's an awful blue, and I'm not alone in that thought. I've heard from many people that have come up to me and said, "You're right, that blue fucking sucks, and I won't use it until it's gone."
I was dying once, and they were going to revive me with a defibrillator, but I did not like the design on it.
I would like Dave to define a lot of people.
More than 5.
Okay, all right, that's a lot of people. That's fair. All right, anybody else?
I want to know if all 5 of those people, if the color was the only thing that stopped them from using it. Like they were on board, thought it was great, saw the color, oh, fuck this.
I don't know.
All right, so we'll get on with this then. Why does I sound like a robot? Does anybody else hear that?
A little bit.
Oh, all right. Well, okay. So
it's an echo in your nose.
that's likely. So Steal This is a project that we're doing for Nano, but it's a permanent thing for us, and we'll release it for everybody sometime next year. I have no idea when. It will basically right now it's just a series of outlines that we'll talk about. Next year we'll polish it off into an actual book, and Bonnie will do something to over deliver like she does with everything she touches, and it'll teach you guys to adapt the outline or whatever. But for us right now, it's just been a hands-on process that really Joel has done most of the heavy lifting. That's why we're having Bonnie and Joel on this, because Joel has interpreted it the most. And Bonnie was the architect of the primary outline, and I'll explain the idea, which what I've compared it to the most is that joke, The Aristocrats. And if you don't know The Aristocrats, you can look at the documentary or Google it on YouTube and see a bunch
I saw an Aristocrats mention on a show recently. I can't remember where. It was something we were watching, and somebody was... But there is a weird echo. I am getting a little bit of that from somewhere. And somebody was like, it might have even been on The Office when we were rewatching The Office, and somebody was like, And then the guy
there
says,
is one on the Aristocrats. Yeah, there is.
yeah, but you don't get the whole thing. You just get the end, and he goes, and that's my act, and blah blah blah. And the guy doesn't get it. He goes, no, you don't understand. You're supposed to be really depraved. It's like, oh, that's the Aristocrats.
Yeah, so
Aristocrats, not the Aristocats.
Huge difference. But the Aristocrats is it's this joke that comedians have always told to each other, and it goes back to the days of vaudeville. And there's really nothing to the joke. It's all about the setup. This guy walks in and he says, hey, I got a great act for you. You're going to love it. And the booking agent says, can you explain the act to me? And then that's the actual joke. A comedian is supposed to just tell their version of that joke. And, you know,
your version of the act. The whole joke begins with the construct of the agent asked for the act, right?
Yeah, and then
so they're inserting that middle piece.
Yeah, so the middle piece is the joke, and then the punchline is always the same. The booking agent says, wow, that sounds like one hell of an act. What do you call it? And then they say, oh, we call it the Aristocrats.
Well, the funny part about it is the middle part where they make it more perverse.
Yes, clearly.
Horribly obscene.
Like, I'm surprised Dave hasn't done his own version.
Oh, I have.
Okay, all right. Because it does seem like that kind of thing. You're really, see, comics are playing to other comics. So there's certain things that a comic that wants to be a successful comic with maybe a TV show someday is never going to say on stage. There's just places you just don't go. But comics to comics, they have their own language, right?
Now, if you tell that joke once, you're not directing a Disney movie, though.
Right, exactly, right. And I'm sure that there's some people on the documentary who are like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. So, like, Bob Saget's version is crazy and over the top. Sarah Silverman's version is one of my favorites because of its subtlety. It's just like she does it more of a story. But that's the whole point. Everybody brings their style to it. So you get a very Sarah Silverman style joke when she tells her version. So
I suspect that we're still not getting their version on that documentary. I suspect there's still a little
Gilbert Gottfried's version.
Yeah, I agree with Joel, because there are places you're just not going to go when a camera is running, and these people know that. I think Joel's right.
I don't know, man. They got pretty dark.
I actually don't remember. I saw the documentary once, whenever it came out, like 10, 15 years ago. It's been a while. But I do remember being in love with this concept that the joke was a throwaway and it was all in how you told it. And the fact that all of these people had this secret language, there's something really cool about that. And this isn't the first time we flirted with this idea. Way back when, I don't know if it's 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Christine came up with the idea for Shadows of Nar, which was the same thing, where we had this one outline and how many different versions of that could be told. And so our big focus, and we'll talk a lot about this in the next couple of months, but our big focus for next year is educating our internal authors as to the best of our ability, and then taking all of that education that's very specific to us and sharing it with all of you. And we're creating those materials now. And Steal This is another piece of those materials. The idea was we want to create a universal outline that has basic elements that we could deconstruct and move around. And it has the what as any outline would, but it also has the why. And this why has really driven the interpretations of this. I think that's what's made it possible for Joel. Have you done 5 versions, Joel?
6 now.
Wow, okay. So Joel's interpreted this same outline 6 times, and they're totally different stories. Anybody who reads the finished version of these stories, you're not going to be able to say, wait a minute, that sounds like this other story, unless you read them back to back and somebody pointed it out to you. They're very different, but they all start from the same root outline. And so our goal with this is a teaching, tool for all of our authors in-house now, but going forward, when a new author joins us, they can write to this outline, and we get to see a lot. We get to see how they interpret it, who they are as a storyteller, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. It's just a great practice outline. And so we had this idea a couple months ago. Bonnie got right on, working on this master outline. And she did 2 versions of it. One that's the whole, it's a novella rather than a full book. It's 20 chapters, but here's the full 20 chapters with full beats for all of it. I think that's maybe 10 to 15,000 words, that outline. for a novella. So it's a very fleshed out outline. Then there's a skeletal version of it that's just a few thousand words that has maybe a sentence for each chapter. And then we've got all these different interpretations of it. So our idea was to create something that was universal enough to be adapted in any way possible. And we've kind of proven that. And now it's just how many of us within the company want to pick this as a nano project and kind of roll with it. So I'm actually seeing how many versions of the story I can tell in November. That's kind of my goal. And I've got Joel hit a few versions. Well, I have kind of a stack of these. And so I'm just going to see how many I can tell, how differently they come out. And that's a pretty exciting project. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie, who did the original construct, so she can kind of talk about her approach, because it was kind of a big ask, not can you make an outline, because we do that literally every day around here. But it was more like, can you make an outline that has these big movable pieces, like, hey, include a mystery box, include this kind of relationships, because we had to think almost, it's like if you write a parable, you've got these characters who are just rather archetypal, and you can do big things with them because there's so much that you already know. Oh, that's the mentor character. So we needed that on an outline level. Like, what are the big pieces that we can use so that if Joel wants to take it and set his 200 years earlier, he can do that and he's not missing any of the point. So Bonnie, all yours.
Thanks. This was kind of a really, really interesting project for multiple reasons. First of all, I've been outlining for specific people. I've always outlined like for myself or for Sean or helping Marie or helping Eileen. So usually when I'm creating an outline, I'm trying to think about like, what's the aesthetic of the person who's going to write this story, and how can I create a story that's going to really take advantage of their voice and what the kinds of things that they like to write about. But for this, it had to be flexible enough that everybody could do something with it. We had an initial brainstorming
Was
session.
that intimidating, or was that daunting or exciting?
Both. I was like, this is going to be awesome if I can do it. So everybody got together and we talked about what we wanted to be in it, and we hit on the idea that it would be a road trip story that would have a contest in it. And first we were thinking like Little Miss Sunshine, where the contest is at the end. But then some people were excited about the road trip being the contest. So the outline had to be adaptable so that it could be either or. We needed to have 3 twists, 1 secret, a mystery box, 2 people in a dysfunctional relationship, and Dave asked for a dead body in the trunk of the car, but we made that optional. So once we had that, we kind of moved away from the idea of it being kind of similar to Little Miss Sunshine, and we were, I think we settled on the idea that it was going to be an adaptation of Around the World in 80 Days, which I never read. So I went to Wikipedia, looked at the plot summary, and basically picked out the elements of that story, which I was really interested in, which is not just the road trip, but that they picked up passengers along the way so that they were kind of accumulating people. So that was something that kind of clicked for me. And then I met with Marie and we kind of brainstormed a premise. And we decided initially both of us don't like road trip stories. So we said it has to be something that doesn't have these things that we don't like.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's important. Like it's not just that you didn't like road trip stories. There's specific reasons that kept it from being highly adaptable. So what are the reasons that you don't like it, and why do you feel like that kept it from being highly adaptable?
Actually, it's not so much that it kept it from being highly adaptable, but I think both Marie and I felt like there are certain things that happen in road stories that neither of us enjoyed. Like the characters often have to do something that makes them too stupid to live in order to get them out of the car, because the author wants them to be experiencing the places instead of just being shut up in the car. And so there's a temptation there. You have to have them make mistakes. And I've seen so many road trip movies where the characters just do really dumb things that they didn't have to do. Or the other thing I don't tend to like about road trip stories, and Marie agreed with me, is that they're a little bit predictable in that you know what has to happen and where they have to go. So a lot of the obstacles the authors end up getting sucked into throwing at their characters are very external. It's all about like, what's shitty about this place and how can the characters hate it, as opposed to what did the characters do that got them into this mess in the first place. As we were brainstorming the scenario, we wanted to make sure that when the characters got themselves into messes, it was because they did something that wasn't stupid, it was believable, but it was coming out of the flaws that we were setting up for them. And also I was a little bit worried about, because I know we have a lot of people who are going to be writing dramas, but we also have like Neve and Ben, I was pretty sure we're going to want to put some comedy into it, and that's a little bit of a different structure. So it was a kind of a challenge to make it flexible enough that if you took the characters one way, it could be really funny, but if you played them straight, it would also be a dramatic story. It needed to be told from either single point of view or multi-point of view. So it needed to be flexible enough that like Joel has outlines that are single point of view and these are multi-point of view, whereas the outline that I originally wrote, I was writing it as if it were a single point of view that we could bring in other characters as needed. I wanted it to be mainstream enough that it could apply to any genre, and that was something I was really worried about, was like someone was going to be like, I want to turn this into a thriller, and then it wasn't going to work because there was something I put in that was like, you'd never do that in a thriller. And then I wanted there to be a fair amount of physical action that could be cranked up or toned down based on how character-based and literary the story was going to be. And then I set it up with a trio. We have 3 characters where one is clearly the protagonist in the outline I wrote, and the other 2 could potentially be antagonists. And I thought, oh, that'll give people room to play with. They can decide who they want the bad guy to be. But then Joel actually has one adaptation where one of the villains that I picked out, he made her the protagonist, and it still worked. He was able to flip that around. It was really cool. So yeah, there were actually a lot of different things that I was thinking about as I was creating the outline, and it took me a lot longer than it usually does to create an outline because of that.
Right. I mean, significantly, but you weren't creating one outline. You were creating like a meta outline. There was this funny moment, and those of you who don't share a Slack with Bonnie do not know this about her, but she is just seriously like the most giving, most hardworking person that you will meet. But then she also doesn't know how to just like own it. So we were all talking about who was going to write one of these for Nano, and she's like, "I'm so sorry, I won't be able to write one." I won't be able to write one because, basically because Bonnie's doing a lot of stuff. So she's like, yeah, I won't be able to write one. And it was like, Bonnie, you created the master one that we are all going to now tell stories from. So yeah, Bonnie's amazing. And
she still asks me for an outline.
Right.
I'm going to write it next year.
Yeah, so we should turn this to Joel and talk about the adaptations, because I think there's 3 phases to this. We saw the universal architecture that Bonnie was responsible for. The adaptation that's happening, actually, I'm going to start writing this from one of Joel's outlines first, but I also have to interpret Bonnie's outline for Johnny to start writing, because he will be doing this not momentarily, but right after momentarily. Like it's the next thing. And, that's a different way too. So I think we have architecture, we have adaptation, and then we have interpretation. And that's the third part where we haven't really seen the results yet. We're all starting these today. So we don't know what these are going to be like when they're all finished stories. But the next time we dig deep into this and we talk about it with you guys sometime next year when Steal This is a done book. And I think, I don't know this because right now it's just an outline, it's just a concept. But the way we kind of see this is going through, as Bonnie talks about the purpose for each chapter, she'll have the example. And then here's what the original was, and here's, let's say, what the adaptation chapter, the beat for the adaptation chapter, and then a finished chapter. So you can, anyone reading this book and the outline can see how differently it is adapted chapter to chapter. And it's a real tangible, hands-on experiential way to learn. And that's what we're trying to do, is create learning that isn't really available out there. It's, instead of this is how things work, we're showing instead of telling. It makes a big difference in how fast we see our own writers grow, and that's what we want to accomplish. So Joel, talk about, because you make this look easy. I know it's not. Like I know it's not, but you really do make it look easy. You're dropping these all the time. In fact, you know, Dave and I are working on kind of an amazing project that I'm super excited about that won't come out until 2021. We have no business working on that. The reason we're working on that is because we got on a call to figure out our, you know, what the CI version of this would be. We didn't really have an idea that we loved. And you're like, I got it. and you're doing, you know, you dropped something for that particular idea and did it quickly. So what is it, do you feel like this has helped you to outline, is this sped up your process? Is it the same? What are the benefits and the drawbacks of this experience been?
Well, my process is the same. And if I can step back and not necessarily, I'm not trying to correct you necessarily, but you said that I had done the heavy lifting, and that's inaccurate. It's actually Bonnie that did the heavy lifting. And this outline that she wrote, although when you first look at it, it does seem very vanilla. Excuse me, but there is there's a particular reason for that. And she and I touched on this in private. And one of the things that I focused on was not necessarily the journey of the characters or their arc, although that is important, but rather what the reader is supposed to experience during the story. And that's what made it easy for me to outline in different genres or styles or you know, 200 years in the future or whatever. It's that I was able to follow not necessarily what the characters were doing, but what the reader was expecting, or rather what we as writers were expecting the reader to feel at that particular moment. So in that regard, it was very, very easy because I didn't have to do anything except explain what I saw in my head. You know, I described the world and the people, and I didn't have to worry about how those people interacted because she'd already done it. I didn't have to worry about subtext because she already had it in there. I didn't have to worry about how I was supposed to manipulate the reader because she had already done it. So but it was a paint by numbers kind of a thing. So it actually ended up being very, very easy. And all of the outlines that I did are attributable to her. And I don't know if she's going to accept that praise, but she deserves every bit of it.
Bonnie, publicly accept that praise before I ask you the next question.
Thank you so much, Joel. It's very kind of you.
Bonnie, were you surprised by how different all the stories were that Joel was putting in?
I was, even though I knew intellectually that that the stories were going to be really different. It just was mind-blowing, the diversity of storytelling that Joel came up with, just in terms of everything from straight horror. He wrote me like a totally paranoid, dark fantasy. He's got like the Wetwork story is like so awesome. And I love that there are two different ways that you could take the relationship in it in terms of like the three main characters. Like I think when I looked at it, I gave you two different like pathways that you could take it as you're interpreting it in terms of like how the characters were gonna relate to each other. But it was just like such good sci-fi. And it's just amazing. And like the other one that I haven't seen yet is 90s, and I know hers is going to be mind-blowingly different too. In just in terms of like what she's going to do.
I haven't seen 90s, and I'm dying to. I haven't seen 90s. I haven't seen Ben's, and I haven't seen the one that Joel wrote for you. I haven't seen those three, and well, all of them.
That one's pretty good, but I just read the 90s before I got on this, and it's really good. The synopsis for it is, it's good. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. And so people listening to this probably heard 90 before when she was on, and she's just such a wonderful storyteller. And the only reason she's doing this project is because she wants to do the project. Like, it doesn't really fit on her calendar. It doesn't really fit with anything else. 90's been preparing for a year. 90's been with us for a year, just head down, doing her work, showing up to every meeting, just like ready to crush 2020. And this project came up, out of our Sterling and Stone farts, which, happen constantly. We're like, wouldn't it be awesome if we did this for Nano? And I think that she said something in Slack today that basically was, I'm not going to be the person who didn't try something new. And that, you know, that's it. She's going to like, all right. So she's trying, she's writing by an outline, which she normally doesn't do. She's writing from somebody else's concept, which she normally doesn't do. And it ended up being fantasy, which she's never written before.
And the cutest thing is that she publicly, or at least in our Slack channel, she's constantly hedging her bets by saying things like, I never do this, or I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, or this is shorter than I'm used to. Like, stop it. You're gonna be fine.
She'll crush it and it'll be awesome. So was there any difficulty in the adaptation in any of them, and did they get easier as you went along or harder? Because, oh man, I've told the story 4 times.
Not harder, but absolutely different, because the writers are different. And I don't know how Bonnie writes, but she again made it very easy, because we just got on a call. I was like, what do you want? She's like, I want this. So I did that. So that made it really easy. But when I'm writing blind, I have to go off of what I know about, like, your voice or Dave's voice or whomever. And so, like, you are very, very good at, not that you're not good at building worlds, but you're very good at defining those worlds based on the perspective of characters. So your worlds are very, very believable because of the interaction. And so I was like, well, what he needs is rules. He's like a very detailed world, very detailed characters, and those rules establish how you make those characters interact. So that's what I did for you. And then another one is, if the author is, and I don't mean like not good at something, but it's, I want to make sure that the motivations of a character are solid. And so I make sure that the world is something that author can build. Like, he can build all the world and all the characters, but their motivation and their arc is established, so he doesn't have to worry about it. So in that regard, each one was different, but not any more difficult than the other one, because I had, again, the amazing outline that she originally did. And then I do have sort of an intimate knowledge of the way the other authors in the company write. So if I were writing for somebody just out of the blue, I would have no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so I do have a reason for this line of questioning. So the next question is, how do you think that you would have been able to adapt this outline, I don't know, 2 years ago? So you've been with us for a while now, and like you just know a lot more about story. You know a lot about structure and craft and stuff like that. Do you think that kind of like invisible constant knowledge made it this way, or do you think if you'd had the same style of outline 2 years ago, would you have been able to adapt it this way so fluidly?
No, it would have sucked. I had no idea what I was doing 2 years ago. Particularly when it comes to outlines, because it was just string pulling. You know, back then I didn't understand the fundamentals of story enough to know that characters were supposed to affect their own change, and it wasn't up to me as the author to just like go here and do this thing. So no, they would have been terrible.
Okay, so that's my next question then for Dave, because we really did build this. The intention of it is that any author can go in and get their head around it, but that is a very natural barrier. If you don't have that story steeped in you because you're just doing it every day, it is going to be harder to adapt, because you don't necessarily, even if the why is spelled out for you in that way, it doesn't mean you actually understand it or have it internalized enough to adapt. So Dave, what is it? Because like, I think so Dave is in a really good place right now, and he wants to.
I'm in Florida. What are you talking about?
Spiritually. Dave is in a place right now where he wants to play ball. Like, really, whatever we're doing as a company, even if he doesn't show up on the meetings, it's not that he doesn't care. Like, it's just.
I'm sleeping.
The company doesn't fit in with his life. But
if you all want to meet at midnight, I am down.
But he definitely, I don't think that's true. I think it would have to be midnight one day, 3 p.m. the next day,
True.
Like 6:30. It's just that you have no consistency in your life.
Yeah.
So that's fine. But he is still willing to kind of roll with whatever the company wants to roll with at any given time right now. And so we had this concept, and there was no refusal. Dave wasn't like, that's a stupid idea, I don't get it.
I did say I hate road trips.
He did say he hates road
in
trips.
stories, in movies, and in real life.
My
ideal road trip is like playing Grand Theft Auto.
But there was no Dave was willing to tackle the project, but then when we actually started talking about the project, there was a resistance there. Not in I don't want to do this, but just in like a very normal fear that Dave gets, which is I don't know how to tell this story, and I don't really know what you want from me. And when Dave's feeling those things, he kind of shuts down creatively. And so I knew that the better thing would be to get a concept from Joel, let Dave stain it, as I said, and then I could go from there. And I like that idea. Dave puts his personality into it, and then maybe that would help him to see, because he saw Bonnie's original, and like I gave him a bunch of interpretations, and I was like, I don't know if you should read all these. It might overwhelm you. It might confuse you. But seeing Bonnie's and then how Joel interpreted it might be enough. But Dave, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that you are a more typical avatar for our listeners. I think that most people, like not most, but a lot of people will approach the craft in the same way that you do, and with some of the same confusion and with some of the same apprehension. So can you kind of talk us through that? Like what was the overwhelm when you saw this concept? What was your reaction? And you can be honest, like if you hate it, talk about it.
I didn't like the idea, and I couldn't think of a story that worked with the idea without completely changing the idea. But
did you see how much the ideas were changed? Like there's no concept
concept. Yes, I did see, and I was prepared to tackle it and come up with something. I was a bit hesitant. I was going to do it. I was hesitant. And
you were playing full out for sure. This is not
typically for me, like if the more I have to try and push a story, the less that story is going to work. A story has to come to me in like a fucking supernova brilliance, inspiration, or something for real. And the story where I'm doing an outline for right now, like initially when you pitched the idea, I was like, I don't know. But then somewhere over the past few days I've been working on it, I was like, holy shit, this might be the best thing ever. And I'm like super excited, and like it's just awesome. And that's the difference. If I'm struggling, it's really difficult. If I can't imagine wanting to read the book, I shouldn't write the book.
Yeah, no, okay. I love that you said that, because I totally agree. I think that's absolutely right. And there was a moment in our last story meeting where I felt that. And, like there's an older version of me that just would have like tried to make Dave happy with that story and been like, oh, if I just think hard enough, I'll find the thing about this that Dave loves, and then he'll be excited, and then I'll be excited.
You dress up that broccoli all you want. It's still broccoli.
Right. Yes. And so at this time, I'm like, I'm better at knowing Dave. And I'm like, you know what? We don't need to do this. I can find a different version of this, and we can circle back, and we've got plenty of time. And, we don't even have to write a version of this for CI. And if we do, we do, whatever. But like, I like that. I think Joel came up with a concept that you could totally get behind, that we wouldn't have come up with ourselves, and that's all awesome. But as far as the project itself, I knew when to pull out, and that's when I had that other pitch, because I knew that pitch, even if it didn't sit with you well immediately, there was enough there for you to marinate and come to
doubts
love.
Would creep in.
Yeah, well, it's a more straightforward, because the other one is about people. I think here's the dividing thing.
I don't like stories with people in them.
Well, no, Dave isn't really one for a gimmick or a system. He's just not, and that is one way where he does, I think, clash with a lot of other writers and the way they work. I think a lot of writers, most writers even, are looking for some sort of formula. They're looking for some sort of template. They're looking for some sort of structure that they can kind of adhere to. Dave doesn't know how to do that. He doesn't want to know how to do that. He wants to just tell a story. And what he actually wants is like to have such an understanding that he could just sit down and tell the story. And that comes, slowly, book by book, project by project, for sure. But if we're actually handing him a template and saying, adapt to this, he bristles. He bristled during the Stories to Go days. Like, he did it, and he did it great, but he bristled. And he bristles against this. And so I knew, okay, what's better off is if I give him a totally, I don't know, like a grand concept. What we have for 2021 that we're working on now is a grand concept. It's big. So like, give him that idea and then see, but it's all about people. You know, we were talking a lot about evil and the spectrum of evil, how some people, like in Breaking Bad, there's a spectrum of evil, right? From everyday evil that's just not a big deal, like Marie's shoplifting, right? Like, just it's bad.
Marie from Breaking Bad,
right? Not our Marie. Marie, you're in the clear. But
she's like, why are you saying that publicly?
if you like Marie and Walt actually have, you know, very similar problems. They're, you know, they'll make excuses for themselves. They have ego, but their spectrum is crazy where he's just out of control. So that level of evil, that seemed like something I knew Dave could work with. Hey, Dave, we're talking about evil and how
I'm there.
Everyday people are complicit, and Dave's like, okay, I can rock and roll with that. And so now, in the meantime, I feel like I can handle this project with Joel and then come back and say, hey, Dave, here's the base pieces. Here's what we had with Bonnie. Here's what we had with Joel. Here's the finished product. And then that little bit of takeaway that Dave wants that makes him a better storyteller, book to book and project to project, he'll be able to walk with it anyway. So I still want Dave to get the takeaways from Steal This, even if I have to go, you know, the long way around.
Well, it was a thing I did for that outline that you asked for, because I don't know if he's read it or how it was received or anything, but
I haven't read it yet.
Okay, I know that
I'm trying to figure out the rest of this thing I'm doing now.
Gotcha.
I can't keep two things in my head. Go on.
Well, thank you. The thing that I was careful to do was, because Dave is so good at characterization, his characters are very believable and very deep. So that's obviously something that I didn't want to do. You know, why spend time explaining who this character is when he's just going to do a better job at it than me? So I was like, this is the guy, this is what he likes and wants, and this is the thing that's bothering him. And I just moved on from there. I was like, I don't want to spend any time doing this because I know Dave will do it better. So that was because Sean asked earlier what was, you know, how I approached it for a particular author. And for you, that's what I did. I didn't bother giving him super deep backstories because I knew you'd do a great job at it.
Yeah, and I do like fences and guidelines. Generally speaking, as long as I can color really fucking wild within those lines.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's a great example because we all do have very different ways of writing and interpreting an outline, and what we need in an outline. So our last project with me and Johnny, the one that he'll tell you about or commiserate with you about in a month or two or whenever he's ready to. But yeah, we lost like a full book on that. We did what we call the Dave, and, you know, like wrote for a substantial amount of time, went through a lot of self-loathing, threw the book away and started over. Like it was totally from the Dave playbook, and it was really awful. It fucked with Johnny's head more than he would have liked. But one of the things that we realized, like there's a couple of great takeaways from that. The fact that we realized one of the things we need in our outlines is a really open-ended final act. Like we should not ever be deciding what happens in the final act because we don't know that. I mean, some authors do. Johnny and I individually might. Together we don't. We should never try. We should never pretend. It's always a mistake. We also learned that we need more spare outlines. And we had found like a very happy medium after working together for many years. And then there was a third partner brought into this project, and you know, they wanted to see the story before it was written. And we're not used to doing that, and it fucked us up. And so we really, but in a good way, to where we had to deconstruct it and say, why did this fuck us up so hard? Because it wasn't a small, like, I mean, we stumble all the time, but this was not a stumble. This was a reboot. And so, like, once you have a reboot, you have to ask yourself why. And we're like, oh yeah, like Johnny needs to understand the characters on a really, really deep level. And he needs to kind of understand the story and the theme. But from that, it's just like one sentence prompts. And so I'm actually only using Bonnie's skeletal version to map out Johnny's outline, because I don't want to get lost in the weeds. I really want to know what's the why of the scene, and then boom, I'm going to map it onto a premise for Johnny. But I know the most important thing for that is simplicity of prompt, and then what is it that Johnny wants to say. And Johnny's in, you know, an emotionally, I don't know, like, what's the right word, Johnny? Like, you have things you want to say. He has things on his mind, and I need to give him an outline that's almost like a platform.
Right. You're talking about the Steal This outline, because you kind of conflated those with the current project.
Not in general outlines, and not the outline or the project he's finishing.
No, but and this isn't a standard thing for me at all. I don't think that. I mean, maybe it'll become this way, but it's not like this is how Johnny writes. It's just how it feels like this project might work well and might be zippy and might fulfill some of the things that I want. Is to think, I mean, you said that as well as it can be understood, I think, in terms of like something I want to say. Like, there are books that just have an attitude to them. You know, you're just like, there's more of a feeling behind. I mean, of course there's a plot, of course there's things that are happening, but it's just a book that just kind of punches you like, oh, that changed the way I feel about something, or this author was angry about this thing. And so it's that sort of thing. It's like, how do I, it's cathartic, actually, I think is maybe a good way to put it. Like, I want Sean to give me an outline that I can get all cathartic on. Yeah,
that's the perfect way to say it. Bonnie, do you have any insight into the average author who would, and I know this is a long time from coming out, but just the idea of interpreting outlines or outlining for somebody else specifically? I know that there's a big collaboration movement right now. So the idea of outlining for somebody else or interpreting an outline that somebody has written for you is going to be a growing trend. So if you are, there's a spectrum. Are you a Dave or are you a Joel in interpreting this outline? Will you really bristle against the idea of figuring out how your story maps onto this construct? Or are you going to get it and then be like, ooh, I know how to put this through the spin-o-matic and come up with new ideas? So like, where do you think that the average author, what's the best approach to doing something like this?
I think, and I'm going to want to pull Joel in when we actually write this up, but I think that whatever your normal process is a good place to start. I was actually talking with Stacy this morning, and we were talking about this project, and she was saying that it felt a lot like one of the things that she does when she's just looking for ideas is she'll go and she'll just look at TV summaries of stuff she hasn't watched and just try and rewrite one of the TV guide summaries of just several things and see if just rewriting it sparks an idea. And I kind of think that however you are already using creative prompts in your life, whether it's like seeing a TV show and going like, ooh, I want to write Breaking Bad, but like in space, or if you're like, oh, I really want to write a story about somebody who explores their sexuality, or I really want to write a story that's all about like family dysfunction. It's like,
I want to write all those stories.
Yeah. So like wherever you start with inspiration, it's like putting the outline in that context and saying, okay, I know that like the thing I get really excited about is character arc. So if somebody gave me an outline to adapt, the very first thing I would look at was like, say, what is the character arc in this? Or if there isn't a strong one, what's the potential? And then I would start trying to find a character arc that I'm really interested in writing about and saying, okay, how could this story help me explore that? And like Marie, we've been working with Marie, getting her unstuck on plotting. And we discovered that she's very specific. She has to start with a world, and it has to have some sort of fairy tale resonance for her. So if she was adapting an outline, I would say, what do you love about the world in this outline? And like, how could you connect it to some sort of fairy tale that you love, and how could you start adapting it that way? And I don't know, Joel, I don't know how you usually start plotting, but where do you usually start with these outlines? Are you starting with character? Are you starting with world? Are you starting with something else?
I always start with action, with what happens. That's sort of string pulling thing, you know, like how to get them from A to B or whatever. But it's interesting because outlining it's an art form by itself, and a lot of people are hesitant to outline for somebody else because it's the same thing as putting something up for critique. You know, it's like releasing a book. So if you send somebody an outline and they hate it, that hurts, or at least they assume it's going to hurt. So the very first thing I do when I start an outline is I tell myself that it doesn't matter if the person for whom I'm writing it thinks it's shit, because it doesn't matter. Because as you said, it is adaptation, it's interpretation. So as long as I'm not, it's important for me anyway, as an outliner, to not have an ego about it. Because if I send it to somebody and they don't like it, it's not me. Or at least I hope it's not Dave. I hope it's that they don't like me, that it's just they don't happen to like the outline. And I can either do better or learn more about what that person expects. If that person is unwilling to tell me what they expect, then fuck them. I'll write a different outline. But it's a compromise, you know, because you are agreeing to take somebody's outline and interpreting it. You are keeping a lot of the things that are in that outline, because presumably it's some good ideas. But then if you are outlining for somebody, you're also, the expectation is that they're going to get rid of some of it. Some of it's just not going to meet with their approval. And so that is the very first number one thing I do is to prepare myself for rejection, because they may not like it. It may not work for them.
Well,
it is what I do.
Even our own ideas. So I don't like my first ideas. I think it's a starting point.
Oh, you always hate your first ideas,
Yeah.
dude. You're really critical until like maybe an idea has to be pretty solid before you're excited about it, which is, it's a hugely important part of your process. And that's the thing all of us need to realize, is that our processes are individual, and we can't map it to somebody else. And I think a lot of people try to do that. This works for that writer, so I'm going to make sure that it works for me. And if it doesn't work for you, then you feel like you failed. But that's not really accurate at all.
Well, it's different telling yourself that your idea sucks and having somebody tell you that your idea sucks. One is just the next step in the evolution of your writing. The other one is fucking crushing. It just sucks.
Joel, did you have any on these adaptations? Did you have any that didn't work and you had to trash it and start over, or were they all? Yeah, they read like that.
That's my failing, is that and it is a fault. It really is, and that is every idea that I have is the greatest idea ever. And then I'm 50,000 words or something. I'm like, oh, that sucked. I shouldn't have done that. So
it's like the opposite of Dave then, right?
100%. Yeah, I think everything's the best. Every idea I have is the top of the roller coaster.
Joel is drinking whiskey while he's writing, though.
Exactly. Well, I think that spectrum is actually really interesting, because I think all of us want some place in the middle where we're confident about our ideas enough to kind of lubricate the process, and we're able to sit there and stick with the story and be done without, you know, too much grandiosity about how great we are, or too much self-loathing about how much we suck, right? Just kind of get through that draft. I feel like a lot of us are like on one end of the spectrum or the other.
But I would rather have ideas that I believe in immediately. And this isn't a criticism on anybody, but I would much rather just go ahead and get the idea out and move to the next thing. I'll let somebody else tell me that it's bad, and if that's the case, then that's fine. I got plenty more.
Well,
tons of bad ideas. Don't worry.
Well, that's one of your superpowers, is abundant ideas. Like, it is. How do you measure the weight of an idea? And I know that we talked a little bit about this last time you were on, but like, you come up with a lot of ideas. So how do you decide this one is worth keeping, this one's worth developing, and that one is, not very good? Do you ever sit on them intentionally, or do you feel like they kind of tell you over time, and sometimes you just gotta deal with it for a while?
Nope. Everyone's a jewel. Everyone's a gem that I develop. I just have notebooks full of them, man. So I don't let any of them go, which is why I can develop an idea as quickly as I can, because I've done it. And not to say that some of my ideas they're obviously, I got terrible ideas, but I treat every idea as if it's a good idea, because it strengthens the muscle of development. It helps me be a better outliner and a better developer.
What happens when you're bored with an idea, or it just doesn't spark anything? Like, you start an idea and it's do you scrap it and start over, or you're not bored by it?
I get after it. I fucking dig at it until it's done. And sometimes it's a slog. I mean, there are times when I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore. This is stupid. But it's kind of like getting up at 4 a.m. to work out. Like if you get up early and you do it and it's done, then that's a win. You're like, I won this thing for the day. It doesn't matter what happens after that. That's a thing that I did. So if I have a shitty idea and I'm like, I'm going to finish it no matter what, then I won. Even though the idea is crap and nobody will ever see it, I beat it.
Yeah, if I have a shitty idea, I find like I can work at it, but like it just
you'll end up with a dead baby on Christmas.
I hate it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do. I actually agree with both of what you're saying, because I've worked with Dave long enough. No doubt, when he's having a miserable time reading, I'm gonna have a miserable time with that story. Like I just am. It's gonna be harder, and it's not gonna be as good. When Dave's into something, it's way easier to edit. I enjoy the story more. Like the words are more alive. And so like, I really don't like Dave going against the grain for that exact reason. But I'm much more of the Joel philosophy.
I would like to be able to flip that switch, but
yeah, I write through anything. And I figure that if I made a mistake earlier, it's because the story needed that, and I'll figure out how it changes. And I know that writing is rewriting, and I'll hit it in the draft. But I it's very rare that I'll go back to the beginning and mess with something.
Well, it's interesting that Dave just said he'd like to flip the switch, and that's the thing about it is it's not a switch. I had to do it.
It's a muscle.
I had to force myself to work through terrible idea after terrible, because I had a bunch of terrible ideas, and since I wasn't writing, because I was too afraid to write so that people would read it, because I was afraid they wouldn't like me or like it or whatever. So I just did ideas, and every terrible idea I developed, one, because it got me better at it, but two, it kept me from having to, publicly have somebody shame me for being terrible. So yeah, I worked at it. It's not something that just, I woke up, was like, I can make a great idea. No, I had to fight and struggle, and yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Dave will absolutely get there. I think part of the problem now is that he's trying really hard to build a catalog and build routines and just kind of get ahead of the game. And that's something where like it is going to take more time, and he'll need a project where we can afford him to just like brutalize himself a little bit to get through the process. Because I think you're totally right, Joel. I think it's just about doing it. And Dave needs the right project to where it's not, there's a few times where we've had to gut stuff out because of a calendar. And so Dave's just not like super into what he's going to do, and he needs to, gut it out. I think if he had to gut something out that he was really passionate about, it would change that equation a little bit.
Well, it's all like, not to be all hyping up my OCD, but when I'm into a story, I'm living and breathing it like pretty much nonstop. And I feel like when I'm really liking it, I inhabit the characters in the story, and that's what makes it good. When I hate the fucking story, or it's just not working for me, they're alien to me. I don't get them. I don't get the story, and I'm just not, I can't, it fucking sucks. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's like pretending to like people. You either really, really like them, or you put on a smile and,
That's funny that you mentioned that, though, because pretending to like somebody is also a skill you can develop.
Well.
No. Dave uses. Okay. All right, I won't even start.
What do you think are the takeaways for this for the average listener? Maybe that's a good way to sort of bring this all home, rather than just what we're doing, but how it applies to the average Joe or Jane listening to this.
I think we should go Bonnie, Joel, and I'll close there. But that's it. Architect, adapter, interpreter. Let's just run with that.
Okay, I think one of the big takeaways that from this project is that you're probably always adapting a little bit in terms of whatever your creative process actually is. And if you look at this and you're like, I don't want to do a formula, I don't want to use a structure, I don't want to pin myself in, Even just looking at somebody else's outline and saying, could I use this to see pacing? Could I just like see where they put the twist? Could I just see where the epiphanies are, where the reveals are? And could I just be inspired by that? Like, could I come up with something that I'm working on, but say, how could I come up with 3 twists because the story has 3 twists, and trying to like use it as a model for how you're going to tell your story. I think you could use it as a jumping off point. Like if like, maybe if you're like Johnny and you're like, I need to nail down the beginning, but I can't nail down the end. You could take somebody else's outline, write an act 1 based on it with your premise, and then just let the story go wherever it's going to go. Like it doesn't have to be, adaptation doesn't have to mean that you have to adapt the whole outline. You can use any part of it as a jumping off point to do whatever you naturally do in your creative process.
And Joel, what would you say?
Awesome. First, I wish I knew Dave better so I could say I love him like a brother, but I love him as much as I can right now. As far as the adaptation process, the first thing is to get you a Bonnie.
It does help.
In lieu of
now
that,
available at your local stores.
That's right. Adaptation is as easy as saying, I want to write a story that's Home Alone with robots, or as complicated as what we're doing. So it's as we mentioned, it is a muscle that you can develop. It is a thing that you can do. So if you're doing it for yourself, do it as often as you can, because either you're going to hate everything you do or love everything you do. And either way, the end result is you're doing it over and over. The second thing, or third or fourth, I don't really know which number I'm at this point. Just remember that if you're doing it for somebody else, they may hate it. And you can't take that personally. I mean, that to me is the biggest thing. If you're doing something for somebody else, they may not like it. And you have to accept that fact.
Yeah, I would say that the big takeaway here is that creativity is borrowed. I mean, really, it's what Bonnie was saying. You're already adapting in some way. And Joel touched upon this theme too, is that it's exercise. Writing isn't just rewriting, it's exercise. These are not switches that you can flip. They are muscles that we build.
No wonder I'm so averse to it.
Yes. No, it is. It is exercise. No, there is a little bit of truth to that. Dave really bristles against discomfort. Feeling comfort is very important to him. It's one of his core values. He wants to feel like it. No, it's true.
You act like I'm a fucking king sitting on my lazy boy. And
it's not that, but we all have shit that makes us tick for sure. And when something is uncomfortable for you, it's harder than average, I would say. And so some of this stuff, it's psychological and physical discomfort. Like you have to be sitting in a place and get to I get it. But it is exercise. You will do it more and more. And the fact that you are more open and more receptive to these types of things in the first place means that you're growing like you're supposed to anyway. So, but I think that Steal This or any exercise like this, you're never going to get the perfect template. And that's the bridge that you have to cross, because a lot of authors who are looking for that template, it's out there, but it's never going to make writing stories easier. It's going to help you develop an understanding that will make stories easier. If you think of it as just, like Joel said that earlier, if I had done it a couple of years ago, it would have sucked because he would have been using the template in the wrong way. It really is about learning. It's not about like putting in a paint by number story. It's about learning how a story works so that you can think of story in movable parts.
Yeah, having a shop full of tools doesn't matter if you don't know how to use them.
Exactly. Right. Perfect.
All right. Well,
okay, Dad.
All right. So we'll close this up. Thank you all for listening to the Story Studio podcast. You don't get more story packed than today. And it was not the worst show ever, even though everybody thought it was at the beginning, which is great. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see y'all next week.
Adios.